I'm Sam, Samantha. Oh my gosh, sorry, my eyes. Yeah, I do. Okay, I'm a senior. I'm going to Wichita State for healthcare administration, and a hobby, probably cooking. And then I'm also a part of Team Talk.
I'm Haley. I'm a senior. I'm going to Northwestern University studying history, and I love to crochet in my free time.
I'm Reagan. I'll be going to Loyola University Chicago studying anthropology, and I'll be part of the Gannon Scholars Program. And a favorite hobby of mine is sewing.
I'm Marin. I'm a senior, and next year I'll be attending the University of Missouri to study journalism. A hobby that I have is reading.
Hi, my name is Chase. I'm a sophomore, so next year I'll be coming back here. Eventually I hope to study law somewhere good. Hobby of mine, probably reading. I love to read.
My name is Saran. I'm in 10th grade. I'll be in 11th grade next year. And I one day hope to also go into law. And one of my favorite hobbies is going through my dad's bookshelf, and because it's a big bookshelf, and looking for his annotations in the books.
My name is Emery. I'm also in 10th grade, so I'll be coming back here next year, and I hope to study some microbiology, microbial engineering, genetic engineering, things like that. And one of my hobbies is I sometimes go up to places like Cedar Crest and I fish, and then I dissect the fish and kind of learn about their anatomy. I do that with other organisms too, but it's a little more accessible with fish.
We went over like the history of scribes, like scribes in Spain and in Mexico who would write down cases, like write down the cases for slaves who were running away or like were trying to run away. And I looked through how some of the like the universities in Spain would like dictate how the scribes would write in like the court cases, and how different universities had different styles of writing, and how that like trickled down to how the scribes would record the court cases. I also looked at some paintings and drawings of, like recreated paintings and drawings of old Native American drawings.
I think probably a group favorite of ours on one of the trips was this map of the Americas, I believe from the 1500s or 1600s, around that time frame. And some parts of it were like surprisingly accurate, especially along the eastern coast. But then, you go out west and California is a giant island. So it really spoke to like how much we've learned about the earth, especially obviously with satellites, but even before that, how we've been able to improve map making significantly.
I think that one of the most interesting things that I saw was the Eddie Faye Gates Tulsa Race Massacre collection. And I'm currently working on a paper about some of the artifacts in that collection that were related to her summer Holocaust fellowship experience, where she got to see like the differences in memorialization and education of the Holocaust and the Tulsa Race Massacre, and like the differences between those two, and how she was able to make an impact here in Tulsa.
I agree that my favorite was the map from 1602, I think. It was just amazing to see how many cities they had labeled on the eastern coast of Mexico and the United States, and how different that was on the other side. Like Chase said, California was literally an island.
I really liked the maps as well. One thing that I learned last time was I think we were looking at a Dutch map from the 1600s, and it had a little like monster in the ocean, and I was like, oh, it's like a puppy mermaid. And she was like, that's one of the like professors who was working there. She was like, that's actually how they like deciphered where were like coral reefs with rough water. And so like that was just like a cool little piece of information that I feel like I otherwise wouldn't have learned. It was really interesting.
My favorite was probably the Native American paintings and some of the letters, because with the letters, since they were made so long ago, the paper started to deteriorate, and they used this like rice grain paper to restore it. And then the Native Americans, like when those were painted, the paint was made from different chemicals and materials, so they'd like glow in the dark pretty much. It was this painting with it was a Native American on a horse, and so they would put on like the black lights and certain colors glow.
I know that the painting that she's referring to, I don't recall his name, but he was from Tulsa, and his history, I believe, was with Cherokee.
I think so.
Yeah. So definitely local.
I mean, I think overall, I think most of them were from the Oklahoma area, but it seemed like there were like a variety of other tribes as well.
I think it did. Last semester, I took a class called 20th Century Conflicts, Latin America and Asia, and we looked at a lot of maps in that class. So bringing you back to the maps, looking at that was really interesting, and I got to go back to my teacher and talk to him about that.
I think it also added a layer of like new questions, because obviously Holland Hall is really great about fostering like curiosity, and we do a lot of like research in our history classes specifically. And I think going to Gilcrease and seeing all these new like documents prompted new questions and made me want to go deeper. There was one document about like it was like a legal document of an agreement between like the white population and Cherokees about how they were going to treat African Americans. And there was conversation of freedmen. I don't remember all the details, but I remember like wondering how much agency the Cherokee people had in that conversation. And like, I wanted to dig deeper into that of how much were they really a part of this drafting process.
I think I remember the document you're talking about. It was really interesting because I believe it was referring to African American slaves in Cherokee sacred areas. And it seemed like the penalty for interrupting a sacred time was far harsher for a slave than it was for a Native American. Or what really stood out to me was that specifically white people were mentioned. But it is true that the Cherokee Nation, as well as other Native American tribes, did own slaves. So I have some Cherokee ancestry, and it made me like you have real questions about what's the impact of this, what's the impact of that, how did that impact even modern day relationships. It's very interesting.
I agree when you say that it makes you want to dig deeper and ask more questions, because with the different universities producing different scribes who use different ways of writing, just goes to show how something in another country can affect something across an ocean. And it makes you wonder how much the cultural norms in this country affect the way people act in other countries. and it makes you wonder, like the cause and effect of everything. The reason some of the slaves were like, some of the trials were over how the slaves, like in order to like get their freedom, they would say blasphemies about God, and that was considered a crime under Spanish rule. If they were to do that under like native Mexican rule, it wouldn't be the same. The reason they got the trials in the first place is because of the cultural norms that were imposed onto the indigenous Mexicans that were living in the area.
For me, I feel like I am very into history too, so it just brought like a better understanding of the meaning of most of the artifacts, because it's like you can look at all of these pictures online and be like, oh, this looks so nice, or like this is cool, but there's a deeper understanding to what it was created for. And I saw that with a lot of the artifacts and the cases, because we wouldn't know that much about them if we hadn't actually been there and looked at the actual artifact. We wouldn't be able to understand it as deep as we did then.
I think it's also just more engaging to be in real life with it. To look at an image online, it's like 2D, and then when you can actually like see it, and they even like have a lot of tools for us to like touch it, that just adds like, I mean, even when I'm reading a book, I'd rather read a real book and turn the pages than read on my Kindle. If I have the option to, like, I always love to like touch it and feel it. It just adds like, especially like I would probably describe myself as a kinesthetic learner. Like it just adds so much to how I learn. Helps me retain it better if I can like touch it, see it, feel it, you know?
I mean, I think it really showed me like how important it is to like have these archives and like these memorials, especially when it comes to things like the Tulsa Race Massacre, because if it weren't for this technology and like these archives, a lot of that would have been lost. In my research in my African American Studies class, I found that like many of the like newspaper articles and photographs that were like in immediate response to the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the like photographs that showed like the worst of the violence, those were immediately destroyed following the race massacre. And just 25 years later, like many Tulsans didn't even know that that had happened. And so I think that it really showed me like the importance of preserving these archives now that we do have this technology in order to like maintain those.
I think going deeper into it, I did look a little bit more into the case and all that Eddie Faye Gates went through for her research. And if we didn't have most of the things we have preserved now, we wouldn't have enough evidence for her to even have a fight. Because with the evidence now, she's able to at least fight for those people that lost their lives and were thrown in the mass graves and never had gotten any recognition or anything back from it.
I think I got like a greater sense of like how much work goes into the preservation of these documents and these photographs and these testimonies. We saw all the different people that put so much time and work into it. And like, you know, Eddie Faye Gates, or like during the 1990s, that's still like almost 70 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre. So, you know, you're dealing with all the destruction that happened immediately after, even unintentional destruction of these documents just from like age, or like being misplaced, or like if something like flooded, you know, even like this 70-year time span, so much stuff can be lost. So the fight to preserve all of this, like the fight to keep it, the fight to like actually be able to share this with people, like to pursue justice, it's like, it's mind-blowing. It's awe-inspiring, really.
I think with everything that's been said, it really makes me gain an appreciation for what Gilcrease has been doing with like getting 3D copies of their artifacts and like putting down what they like their collections online, so that way like future generations will have the evidence and they won't need to have to scrape to like find like the smallest bit of evidence, like how like people before them have done.
I think especially with an historical event like the Tulsa Race Massacre that a lot of people tried to cover up, it's really important that we have people actually like preserving the history before it's too late. Because I know that she did like extensive work, especially with like the last known survivors. And I think like now we don't have any, or maybe we have 1, 2. Yeah, like we're running out of time to get those stories, especially because like you said, like so much of it has been lost. A lot of it's been covered up intentionally. So
I feel really sad about that. I mean, Oklahoma, we're already ranked very low in education. I think we're 48th or 49th. So limiting our history curriculum and what people are allowed to teach based on feelings and discomfort is really upsetting to hear, because any history brings up feelings, brings up hope, triumph, sadness, anger. Any historical event that you look at brings up some sort of emotion. And people need to feel those emotions in order to understand history and to empathize with people who have been hurt in the past or are currently being hurt by actions. So I think that we're missing out on an opportunity to increase the empathy of the next generation regarding historical events.
I mean, it's very frustrating, especially as someone who I have siblings who right now are going through this, education system in Oklahoma. I'm in the education system in Oklahoma. Someone who's really passionate about learning about history. Being uncomfortable is like, it's the best part because you're learning. Like if you're just hearing the same thing every day, like, it's all fine, it's all good. You're not learning anything. You're not actually learning about the bad things, because the bad things is part of it. All right. When you look at it just as like, oh, everybody's all fine and dandy, just to cover up, like you said, like for feelings, you're not learning the actual history. You're learning like a fake version of it. You're looking at a picture when like it's just like it's a full 3D world we live in. Like there's not just like black and white. Like there's everything in history, and the world we live in today is so multifaceted. I saw something from a textbook. I don't know if it was exactly an Oklahoma textbook, but it said, like when we're talking about the original Pilgrims, they said Native Americans just happily moved away as like an agreement. Blatantly false on its head. But that's what we're teaching people, because we don't want to confront the ugly truths that we did terrible things in our past. And we need to teach that so we don't continue to do terrible things in our future.
I agree with that. Without our upperclassmen will be moving on and with the education that they received, and we'll be moving on with a less accurate version of that. And I think it makes me angry that we have chosen to prioritize reputations and just feelings that over like what actually happened, and like getting justice, and just like even striving for atonement for what we've done in the past, because it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. Bad things happened. You're not supposed to be okay with it. You were bringing it up into light in order to make us aware And by just like showing the good, like what Chase said, just showing the good and completely ignoring everything else, we're creating a just completely distorted and inaccurate version of what actually happened.
I have a question. Do you know if this will be like exerted over private schools? Because it won't be. Yeah. I was just going to say, I feel incredibly grateful to go here because like in 8th grade, we were reading Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi. I think that's how you say his name. So I feel like and I went to public school, went to Bixby public schools. So I understand both sides of the picture, I'd say. Obviously not on a secondary school level, but definitely on a primary school level, learned that the founding fathers were like gods and didn't do anything wrong. So I feel incredibly grateful to go to a place like this where we don't have to worry about not receiving that information. And I know for me, I didn't have any interest in history until I went to Holland Hall, because this picture I was getting was just exactly what you're saying, just not the full picture. And it was just kind of like founding fathers did this, and then the Native Americans just walked away, and we don't really know where they went, but they just like willingly, it wasn't what it really is. And I think when you're a kid, even, you know that. But it's just, I think it's a shame that people are not going to get to know what makes Oklahoma. Even the bad parts, the good parts, all of it is what makes us who we are today. And there's a lot of we have the second largest indigenous population. It's really important that we acknowledge how important their existence here is and how we are on their land. This is their place, and we need to acknowledge their history. We need to acknowledge, there's still a lot of systematic things in place that marginalize people in Tulsa, and some of those are still we don't even acknowledge them now. So I can only imagine if they are making things even more hush-hush, that it's probably not going to get better. And if we're striving for a better future, I think it's really important that we discuss the good, the bad, everything.
Just wanted to quickly add, I think it was our superintendent of public education who said the Tulsa Race Massacre was not about race, which again is blatantly false. And he got a lot of well-deserved flack for it, but that is who is in charge. And it's really not even about something as simple as kids' feelings. It's about a shirking of responsibilities. Because if we call it just a massacre and we don't talk about the horrible, horrible racism that started it. And as we studied it in 8th grade at my school as well. And we learned that there was a rebuilding in Greenwood, but a major reason that it still isn't as prominent as it was, over a century ago now. Government came in and built highway right through it, straight through the community. And you see it with other infrastructure projects. I believe Dodger Stadium as well in Los Angeles, built in marginalized communities to destroy people. I was recently in Greece, and we went through a community of left-wing people, anarchists as well. And the government right in the middle of the community, a organizing space where there had been protests before. The Greek government was building a giant construction project right in the middle. And it's not just, for the purpose of construction, but it's also to break up these people, to not allow them to organize or spread their beliefs.
I agree with that, with how when saving face, people in power will just pave over all the bad stuff. And I think when people in power say it, everyone else just goes with the flow or follows it, because that's the people in power. They're supposed to be they're supposed to be the good guys. They're supposed to know what's right and wrong. That's why we voted them in. And when they deceive us, it's builds feelings of mistrust. And I mean, like, I know how I've heard people call it the Tulsa Race Riot instead of what really is like the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I think it just makes me so thankful that I go to Holland Hall and that I am able to learn outside of what the higher ups just want me to know.
Another thing, I think it cheats kids out of the opportunity to make their own decisions and to actually learn how to be a critical thinker. If you think that you know the right version of history, then why don't you just tell the full picture? And if the kids believe what you believe, then you must be right. Like, if that's what everyone believes, then that's fine. But I think giving people the opportunity to make their own decision, that's what makes this such a, like, it's freedom is a part of what makes this country amazing to be in. And I think that by not giving them even the option to know the full truth and to make their own decisions, that's taking away some of the freedom that we claim to have.
I think that there is no right version of history. There will always be a dominant narrative, and then there will be other experiences. And that's why we're all so grateful that we go here, because we have the opportunity to ask about these other stories.
Yeah, I think history, how you interpret history, has a lot to do with, like, even if we all read the same document, we're all going to probably find different things that we find interesting in it. And I think that your personal experience and your personal background have a lot to do with how you engage with history. With that being said, like, I do think that there probably is. I do think that there are wrong ways to teach history. There are wrong histories. And I think that those ones leave out I think that there are some stories where you can acknowledge that there are definitely perspectives that need to be in it to be anything close to accurate. But I think you're right. Maybe there's not a right history, but I do think that you can try to get as close as possible by trying to tell what the series of events with as much accuracy to, like, the unbiased truth as possible, and then let people come up with their own opinions of how they think that forms how we go about life today, and also the consequences of it. I think that you can draw connections and show, like, I don't know, I think the right history is hard to come up with, but I do think that there's an unbiased way to teach things, and there's definitely perspectives that any historian can acknowledge need to be included if we want to get anything close to accurate.
One thing that we've been talking about in my crisis and presidential leadership class is big history versus little history. And we've talked about how big history is what you learn oftentimes in, like, a public school classroom, where it's just dates and numbers, and you're not learning the actual lived experience of the people who are going through that history. And so I think that as a teacher, Eddie Faye Gates, like, had that perspective and knew to look for those, like, individual stories and, like, the right questions to ask so that her students would be able to empathize with those people who lived through the Tulsa Race Massacre. And, like, she would be able to educate future generations of Tulsans who needed to understand what happened.
How education in America as a whole be affected if museums didn't really exist, or, you know, if people didn't have these opportunities to, to go on field trips like you did, to go to Gilcrease. What would a world look like where students and children can have those immersive experiences, and, you know, they were taught that kind of big history, just like a pessimistic view, I think.
I think probably the most important thing that you get from an education in history, it isn't just the very important learning of what's actually happened in the past, but it's the development of, like you mentioned earlier, critical thinking skills. History is like the subject where you get to, everything fundamentally is coming from someone's perspective. Not only are you interpreting it through your own lived perspective, but everything that's written is written from someone else's perspective. Even photographs are taken from someone's physical perspective. So when you're learning, you have to learn to interpret and ask questions. These questions, that's what builds actual learning. Like that is what leads people to actually ask more questions. Questions. It's just the answers are the best part. That's what you're getting from it. So when you ask more questions, you learn more stuff. But when this stuff happens, you're encouraged to not ask questions. You're encouraged to just sit there. They're going to spew dates at you. They're going to tell you what happened, exactly what happened. This is the order. You can't ask questions, so you don't learn anything more, and you aren't a critical thinker.
I think if we weren't to be able to have experiences like museums and everything, we would be so ignorant to the truth and what got us to where we are. Knowing people from multiple different public schools, I have learned that they can't go as in depth with certain conversations on certain things in history. And it's just like, it's something that I find important, but nobody else does. But they don't get as much of a learning experience about those certain things as we might. And I think that's what we need to be able to balance opinions and be able to like form a response to contradict and make people think deeper about what they might know, and to let them know that all that they know is not all that there is to it.
Well, I'm Indigenous. I'm a member of the Osage Nation. I think that my tribe specifically, when history is twisted or not told, it is distressing and it causes a lot of issues within our tribe, because Indigenous people we have a very different way of going about things that you might see in a normal government or city, because everyone's related to everybody. So there's a lot of infighting, and we all have different stories, oral histories, and we need places to record these. And so when we aren't consulted in museums or in media or legislature, it just causes so many problems for us.
I want to, just from my experience, like my family came here to America when I was young, and just having an outside perspective of America and then like being taught the perspective of America in here, it's like a huge, well, not huge, but like at times there's like a contradiction between how America perceives itself and how everyone else perceives America. And there'll be times when, like, I used to go to public school when I was a kid, and I would come home and I would say something, or like I would tell my parents something that happened and be like, that's not how we remember it. Because like my dad, he was born in Mexico, and my mom, she's from Poland. So having their perspectives and then having perspective that I learned here, it made me want to ask more questions. And not having that outside perspective, I think that really hurts people, like hurts Americans and people who are learning, because we're just learning from one perspective instead of others.
And when we talk about like stories that aren't being told, I think Buddhism is either the second or third largest religion in either Oklahoma or Tulsa, but you don't really hear about that because the minority never really gets to share its stuff. It's not even minority all the time. It's people who aren't powerful, people who don't get to make the rules, who don't get to choose what gets taught. You know, the victors write the history books. So, you know, we wiped out Native Americans across our country, and we write that it was mutual. You know, these treaties, they knew everything that was happening in them. There was no misleading, there was no mistranslation. It was all good, and they're happy about it. When that's not true, and we know it's not true, but it makes a better story.
I'd like to kind of get in my 2 cents. I think the idea of warping history to avoid hurting someone's feelings is incredibly hypocritical. I mean, just how can you... It makes me angry that you can't... that you're teaching things to avoid feelings as opposed to teaching the truth. There is no such thing as, you know, the right way to teach history. There are better ways to teach history, but you'll never get every perspective, but you can work towards finding as many as you can.
You all have very bright futures ahead of you. And I'm curious, how has this experience helped shape your worldview as you move in to your careers and training for your careers?
I think being especially a minority at this school, I've been able to learn more history about my ancestors and what we had to go through, more than I would have at the public school if I would have stayed. And I'm going into healthcare administration, and so I think the healthcare system is going through a lot right now. And me knowing what I know, I will be able to fight for the people that don't have as much recognition, the people that don't have as much money, but are still getting these hefty bills for things that shouldn't have costed as much. And most hospitals, they don't really care if those people don't have the money, because the reason for like the ambulance and get them giving you medicine is to get more money for the building. And I feel like the history that I've learned throughout the school, even not my own, it just gives me like, I can empathize more with what people go through, and I'll be able to have deeper conversations with other people and not be so ignorant that I don't care what their reason is for being here and what they had to go through to get here and why they're in the position that they are.
I think in law, particularly because that's what I want to go into, hopefully, I think it'll definitely prompt the question of like, who, what, when, where, why, how? Like, who made this? Why was it made? Who was it made for? So I think that it'll just give me a deeper level of understanding about why things are the way they are, and also hopefully inspire me to find ways where I can help and make the world a more just place.
So I want to go into anthropology specifically, and after that, I would like to do something with NAGPRA coordination, so Native American Graves Repatriation Act. So I love museums, and so going to the Gilcrease was such an amazing opportunity for me, and I actually got to connect with their NAGPRA coordinator and learn more about what she does and whether or not I would like it and ask her questions. So that was amazing, and I'm really grateful.
I think as a journalism major, it's like really shown me the importance of like telling the story from every perspective and not just focusing on one. And yeah.
I know we're kind of talking about like future jobs and stuff as well, but I mean, even just from like a personal day-to-day perspective, it gives you just such a better frame of reference for how much work goes into the preservation of this every day. We're kind of coddled by our just easy internet access. I can just go on the Gilcrease website, look up whatever I want to look up, and it's just there for me. But you don't consider like how much time, how many hours, days, months went into every single one of those documents, one of those paintings, and how much is still going into it, into maintenance and stuff. And it's like, that's not even considering like how long it took to find all this stuff in the first place. Like, you know, a lot of this stuff gets covered up, a lot of it gets hidden, and it takes so much hard work and effort to actually find it again. And like that gives you such a better frame of reference for like how the world works. And it's like how we have stuff today. Like so much of what we have now is thanks to people who spend their entire lives just working on it. And it's just such a better frame of reference.
I think it's reassuring that there are other people, that there are adults who also see the problems with how education is being taught and like history is being taught. And I guess like for the future wise, it's reassuring that there are people who also see how systems have been put into place that most of the time intentionally, sometimes not, that like are built to like oppress or like hinder people's progress. And I guess it's really reassuring that there are still people who are like trying to make history accessible to everyone, and it's not just like through a narrow lens of what people say happened versus what actually happened.
I think adding on, we have now like the knowledge that there is always more to learn, more to research. Most people will probably just take what they learned and go with it. But now with everything we're taught and how we're taught to research from multiple sites and not just one specific thing, we are able to understand that there's more to every story. There's more dots to connect than we could possibly think. And that you need to dive into a rabbit hole. If you really want to know more of the truth, you have to go through that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think Mr. Cherry one time told me, he was like, I could learn all day, every day for the rest of my life and still not know everything. And I just thought, like, what a great saying.
Just from the perspective of an individual who doesn't really plan to have a future job in anything really history related, I still find it incredibly important to be well informed. So while it's important to have appreciation for things like history, like truthful history, regardless of the application that you're going to go into, regardless of your job or your educational background. If you're being taught the wrong things, what's the point of learning?
I mean, I think it's just important to like realize the context of like everything, and like being well informed means that, you know, discussed earlier, like a lot of like older museums especially are built off somebody just going somewhere, taking stuff and being like, hey, come look at what I have. And you know, that's still a problem today. Like you have to realize the context of like where stuff's from, like what culture it was, like how did it get here? That's a really important question. How did it get here? Especially with Negra. Yeah. And like our very horrendous at times relationship with Native Americans. Like, what can we do to make things right? Like, what choices do we have now to make up for what we did then? And it's like a difference of something being in our history and something becoming our legacy. Like, how do we, like, if it can't be fixed, like, how do we try and make it better?